Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Give me just 1 second to get organized here. Welcome everybody to the fourth and final session of the Chicago Region Clean Energy Series hosted by BP, NICOR, and World Business Chicago. My name is Nicole McCarthy, Innovation Program Manager at WBC. Since October 2021, the Chicago Region Clean Energy Series has gathered 219 attendees and more than 20 talented speakers, ranging from clean tech entrepreneurs to hydrogen experts. Together, we have learned about the innovation taking place in the Chicagoland region to address our world's most urgent climate issues. And we have witnessed that Illinois businesses are certainly not taking a backseat when it comes to reducing carbon emissions and driving a clean energy economy. So whether this is your first time joining us for this series or you've attended all 4 sessions, we're thrilled to have you here this afternoon. A few quick notes before we begin. We've gathered a fantastic group of speakers for you here today. While the chat feature is enabled, we ask that you please submit questions for our panelists using the Q&A just to minimize any distractions during today's session. Please also note that today's session is being recorded. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Matt Williamson, Vice President of Blue Hydrogen for BP, to introduce today's session on accelerating the hydrogen economy. I'm going to hand it over to Matt. Give me just 1 second.
Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Williamson, and I'm Vice President of Low Carbon Hydrogen for BP, responsible for developing low carbon hydrogen globally. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to the World Business Chicago Clean Energy Series. Collaborative exchanges like the one we'll have today are invaluable in our collective pursuit of a clean energy future. And I'm pleased that BP can play a role in convening this important conversation and listening to some great hydrogen thinkers. Physically, I'm in London today, but my heart is with you in the Midwest. I made my first trip 25 years ago. At the time, I was a very junior engineer working in our refinery business, and I was traveling to get expert help from our research labs on how best to use hydrogen in our refineries to produce low sulfur fuels. Last month, I made my latest trip, and the subject was still hydrogen, but this time using hydrogen as a low carbon energy source. As an integrated energy company at BP, we believe hydrogen will play a significant role in our strategy for delivering BP's ambition to become a net zero company by 2050 or sooner, and to help the world get there too. This is not greenwashing. We see hydrogen as a large-scale, low-energy business. By 2050, it could be the same order of magnitude as natural gas is today, and that is a business worth being part of. We're aiming to be a leading company in low carbon hydrogen. Our CEO has set us the goal of having 10% market share in core geographies. That's a whole lot higher than our oil and gas share, and a sign of our commitment to hydrogen along with our partners. We're active globally, so Europe, Middle East, Asia Pacific, as well as here in the US. In the UK, we're leading a project that will decarbonize 50% of UK's industrial cluster emissions. We expect to capture and store over 20 million tons a year of CO2 emission. That's equivalent to about 7 million UK households, so pretty significant. And as part of this, we'll develop a world-scale low-carbon hydrogen plant. And we want to do the same here in the Midwest, but if I get my way, even bigger. BP is a large consumer of hydrogen in the Midwest at our Whiting refinery, and our aim is to convert this into low-carbon hydrogen and also supply low carbon hydrogen to a range of customers in the region. As part of this, we'd also build a huge carbon capture and storage facility. We're super excited about the opportunities in this space in the US and across the globe. I'm looking forward to a really good conversation today around the role of hydrogen in reducing emissions, reducing carbon intensity, and offering businesses, cities, states, and countries another tool to decarbonize energy. I'd like to thank World Business Chicago for convening this series, and I'm pleased to turn the program over to Ted Kraus of Argonne National Laboratory, who will be moderating the discussion today. So over to you, Ted.
Thanks, Matt. As Matt said, my name is Ted Kraus. I am the laboratory's hydrogen and fuel cell program manager here at Argonne National Laboratory. And I'd like to introduce our panel members today. So let's start off with our first panelist, Susan Stuver from GTI. Susan, why don't you tell us about yourself, your organization, and how does the work you do contribute towards a cleaner environment through hydrogen? Looks like we're still waiting for Susan to be promoted to panelist. Okay. There you are, Susan. So, Susan, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and what the work you do, how does it contribute towards a cleaner environment through hydrogen?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Ted. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Stuver. I'm a senior manager at the GTI Hydrogen Technology Center, which was created to accelerate hydrogen-driven technology solutions that can be deployed at large scales and in such a way that we decarbonize our energy systems without sacrificing the ability to support economic growth around the world. We have an 18-acre campus where we develop and validate and or commercialize hydrogen technology, like production from biogas, advanced infrastructure technology for high pressure storage of hydrogen, as well as have a pipe farm where we research delivery solutions for both 100% hydrogen as well as hydrogen blends. And we also have technology and equipment applications for hydrogen in use, like performance testing of appliances, fuel cell vehicles for heavy duty trucks. We test warehouse equipment like forklifts, as well as fuel cells for backup power. And while not actually located on our campus in Des Plaines, Illinois, we're also validating the performance of hydrogen-powered locomotives. We have quite a few folks working in the power generation space as well to understand how various blends of hydrogen will perform in natural gas power plants. We've got more than a dozen individual labs and facilities to support gas quality testing, material analysis, hydrogen compression, and evaluation of hydrogen compatibility with various materials. And of course, all of these facilities are being supported by over 200 energy companies, organizations, and equipment manufacturers. GTI, we came online as a business in 1941, and we've been in the hydrogen space since the 1960s. We have over 800 licenses and over 1,300 patents, and just recently, we've been making a lot of new friends. So I'm super happy to be here and engage in the discussion and look forward to it.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Let's meet our next panelist, Sayanta Dutta from Heisen. Sayanta, why don't you tell us about yourself, your organization, and how the work you do contributes to a cleaner environment through hydrogen?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ted. And great to be on this panel and great to meet everyone. I'm Sayanta Dutta, Vice President of Growth and Strategy at Heisen Motors. Very simply, Heisen is a technology-driven hydrogen company with our singular mission to revolutionize energy by leveraging our leadership in fuel cell leadership, as well as developing the hydrogen system with our partners. Little bit of history. We have over 18 or almost 20 years of fuel cell development history from our parent Horizon. And while we are a newer company, at least here in the US, established a little over 2 years ago, our long history of R&D and focus on fuel cells, as well as developing the most powerful and highest power density PEM fuel cell stacks in the industry, has allowed us to be a leader in this space. And primarily, we're focused on commercializing hydrogen fuel cell vehicles in the logistics sector. And we look at building our technology moat across the full electrification platform of the vehicle, starting with the fuel cells down to the e-axles, and then in partnership with various companies, various leading companies across the space, building the hydrogen ecosystem from production to dispensing. In a sense, again, with our partners, trying to solve the chicken and the egg problem on the hydrogen demand as well as supply side at the same point of time. And similar to Susan, making a lot of new friends in the past couple of months, and I love the level of activity as well as investment as well as attention that we are getting not only from the audience but also from our panels as well as from our policymakers and other partners in the U.S. focused on the Midwestern side and of course globally.
Okay, thank you, Sayanta. And our final panelist is Gary Young. Gary.
Hi.
There you are.
Hi there.
Tell us about yourself, your organization, and how the work you do contributes to a cleaner environment through hydrogen.
Perfect. Well, my background's a little bit different. I come from a startup. So I'm the CEO of a small startup named Selenite Technologies. We're based out of Chicago now. We're actually formerly with Argonne too, so I'm quite familiar with TED. And what we do is advanced materials for fuel cells, specifically heavy-duty fuel cells. The goal here is that we think that by improving the core materials that go into fuel cells, something called the membrane, for instance, as well as its catalyst, you can dramatically improve their performance and make them rival diesel engines in the future. Teams right now about 7, we're expanding to about 14, and our primary funders and partners include people like Ted from Argonne, and then there's also the Breakthrough Energy Coalition and Shell Ventures.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Okay, so why don't we go to the questions? And I think one of the first questions people would be interested, what's next for hydrogen in the Midwest? What do you see as the next opportunities, either for clean hydrogen or new emerging technologies? And Susan, you're on the production side, so why don't we talk to you?
All right. I think what's on everyone's minds right now is the hydrogen hubs. So in case you haven't heard, I think everyone's heard, the DOE created an $8 billion program for developing like 6 to 10 regional clean hydrogen hubs that will have production, delivery, storage, and consumption infrastructure components, as well as have components that demonstrate promotion of economic development, workforce improvement, safety codes and standards. There's equity, environmental, energy, justice, or what I call EEJ, as well as R&D and innovation components. And in the Midwest, I think all of us here might already be familiar with the fact that we have nuclear plants, we have pipelines, we have CO2 sequestration, we have refineries, and we have existing hydrogen production, we have chemical manufacturing, we also have ammonia and steel production, and we have port operations. So lots and lots of opportunity that I see, and I'll leave it there and let the other panelists weigh in.
Okay, how about Sayanta, especially, from the transportation aspects? You're on mute.
Still a rookie on this, even after 2 years of being remote. No, I echo Susan's thoughts, and obviously being a truck manufacturer with zero emissions vehicles in our backyard, hydrogen that is produced in 0 to negative carbon intensity is a critical part of our pathways as well as developing the ecosystem with our partners to deliver, the fuel cell truck plus that hydrogen to our customers. And with the level of activity going on, especially in the pathways that Susan outlined, I think, we see a lot of opportunity in terms of delivering that clean hydrogen to our customers, plus also other pathways which are up and coming in the Midwest as well as in other parts of the country, especially using waste and biomass as a feedstock with a negative CI score. And at least, our perspective is that it forms that perfect circular hydrogen economy where, we as a species generate a ton of waste, use that waste to create an energy source like hydrogen to use to power our homes, vehicles, and other industries on an as-needed basis.
How about you, Gary?
Well, I get excited for two things, right? So coming from a startup standpoint, right? I like Chicago because I've always been a little bit perplexed by, how come there aren't more startups in Chicago, given that Northwestern, New Chicago, and Argonne's here. So it's kind of exciting to see that finally happening and innovations happening here. And I think it's actually a particularly good fit because you see like institutions like GTI and Argonne has had hydrogen leadership for a very long time in this area. So you're like, well, okay, if I have to pick, between the Boston, Chicago, California, the usual hubs, right, for hydrogen, you're like, which one would I pick? You're like, actually, no, this one makes sense this time for Chicago to take the lead on this. And then I like to think of it more simply as like, when all is said and done, if you consider that, hydrogen is going to be made in a green way, we need electrolysis, for instance, right? Then you say, well, what do you need to actually make hydrogen in that case? Two things, fresh water and excess renewable. NREL actually just published a map for excess renewables. Illinois is not the sunniest state, but there's a ton of excess wind that most people aren't aware of. There's a ton of excess wind. And California has a drought. Illinois has really no problems with the water. So you have actually a lot of hydrogen potential even from the supply side for this particular state.
Okay, thank you. So as Susan mentioned, there's a lot of interest in the hydrogen hubs. There's small hydrogen sort of ecospheres. But, what are some of the challenges? What are the major challenges hydrogen faces, as it tries to become a dominant energy source in the market beyond, its current uses in ammonia and petroleum? Susan?
So here's what I think. I think it's knitting the technology integration with the market analysis. So for example, which type of hydrogen production technology will be best suited for the purposes of the region? Which depends on things like how much hydrogen will consumers need, which we don't yet know, and how will the hydrogen be stored and transported? For example, at what scale is it no longer economical to move hydrogen by truck, and it would be more cost effective to move it by pipeline or by rail? And to understand this, we need to understand the kinds of infrastructure we already have in place, and if it could handle the incorporation of hydrogen. Same goes for storage. Above ground, below ground, gas, liquid storage, which is most safe, reliable, resilient, and most cost effective. And it would need to be compliant with local, state, and federal codes and standards. And so each option comes with a trade-off. And so we need to get our arms around these trade-offs so that we can start developing the detailed infrastructure plans. To me, I think that's the biggest grapple that we all have right now.
Okay, Sianta?
I would echo Susan on that, and I think as folks know, hydrogen is the first element on the periodic table, and it is the lightest gas. So simply saying repurposing natural gas pipelines, we can use that for hydrogen is a great idea, but obviously a lot of research and work needs to be done around that from the infrastructure side. I think in addition to that, support from local and state governments, and we're seeing an increasing amount of activity in that would be critical, in addition to the federal government, would be critical to help develop our ecosystem. I was actually on the call with one of the state senators about a week and a half ago, specifically, helping our gather industry participants like ourselves, as well as other members of the community, to push forward the hydrogen ecosystem in the state. So infrastructure plus policy, and I'm sure technology is a third big aspect, where we need a lot of work to be done to progress that ecosystem.
Okay, thank you. And how about you, Gary? What are your thoughts on this?
I think integration, actually. I like to think of it that when I look at hydrogen today and I consider where say battery vehicles and so forth were, kind of about 15 years ago. And I think that one of the things with hydrogen is that, the honest answer is that it's a more complicated system and a more complicated industry. right? In some ways, it looks a lot more like oil and gas, a little bit from an integrations complexity standpoint, because there's like a lot more producers, the scale is larger and so forth. Short version, I think you can't just like plug your car into a grid and have the grid be black boxed, right? So because of that, if you try to do a hydrogen project right now, just getting all the players in the same room and being like, all right, so you're all doing this and me that and so forth, it's difficult. So before even the project starts, there's too many parts. Right. So I think one thing that can help right now that's helping in the ecosystem is that people are actually talking to each other. But it would be really interesting to see how we can kind of get the people to talk and then start with the smaller pilot projects and then eventually make the partnerships a lot less with a lot less friction so that you can actually scale those projects upward.
Okay. Thank you. Let's take another major concern with hydrogen is the maturity of the technologies. You know, we're talking about many new applications beyond the existing applications for hydrogen. You know, what is the status, you know, of the technologies? You know, when you talk about the hydrogen hub and the ecosystem and you look at these applications, you know, maybe as a transportation fuel, maybe even as blended into natural gas. What's the status, you know, when you look at the technologies out there? Susan, you're on the production side, you know, gray hydrogen is a very mature technology, but there's a lot of new emerging technologies. So what are your thoughts on this?
So for me, I think where we'll see technology innovations in the near term is in carbon dioxide capture for steam methane reforming and other gasification technologies that are currently venting the carbon dioxide, like technology that refines pure streams of CO2 that can then be used in other parts of the value chain, or technologies that actually absorb the CO2 within the reforming process. I also see advances in a method called pyrolysis, which makes hydrogen from natural gas. Rather than creating CO2 gas, it creates solid carbon, and it's called carbon black. Now, that's a high heat process, and it takes a lot of energy. So there's innovation needed to make it affordable and energy efficient, and that's what's happening right now in that. There's also really interesting innovations with electrolyzers. For example, some are conceiving offshore wind turbines that have electrolyzers built right into them. So rather than moving electrons to a large electrolyzer, you're moving hydrogen gas directly to an industrial user or gathering station from a renewable wind power source. I think from a corporate standpoint, there are needs for innovation with operating these systems of integrated low carbon technologies. For example, and I know Gary just kind of touched on this, and Sayanta did too. A system might produce hydrogen from, for example, steam methane reformer that uses renewable natural gas from a landfill. It's storing CO2 and then sends the hydrogen to a steel plant, ammonia production facility, and a fueling station. They also might have several electrolyzers that takes pure water and produces hydrogen on site at several power plants. And all of these operational components need to be tracked collectively and at an enterprise level to be able to demonstrate the reductions in our carbon footprint. So I think at an enterprise level, there's definitely innovation needed to track the progress, to assess the risk, and ensure reliable operation, like as a holistic business unit, much like what the oil and gas industry does in the like large components of the value chain.
Thank you. How about Sayanta? Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, let me touch on two parts of the technology, specifically extending to what Susan mentioned. I think, you know, getting hydrogen production out with a low to negative CI score at scale, there's a lot of technology that is at venture stage, maybe, you know, B, C, or even D. Some are in the process of being commercialized, which would produce, you know, multiple tons a day of hydrogen, but they would still be not at the scale that we would look to convert, you know, the whole energy pathways, you know, 10 or 20 years down the line. And we are working with our partners, and one of them specifically Raven, and which you alluded to, Susan. They use pyrolysis to reform methane from landfill gas, and then the output is carbon black, which could then be done something else with it. And that is absolutely one of the pathways that we're also looking at. The other part of the technology is actually on the demand as well as the use side thread, and that's specifically on, at least where we are focused on the mobility aspect. Our fuel cells currently are 120 kilowatt fuel cell that is loaded onto trucks, and that's capable enough to haul up to, legally 80,000 pounds, but they're strong enough to haul more than 80,000 pounds. And we're developing fuel cells that can do up to 200 kilowatts, plus building the core capabilities around the other parts of the vehicle platform, especially on the electrical side, to deliver that hydrogen power to the wheels in the most lossless and efficient manner possible. So our technology, at least from Heisen's perspective, is already on the roads. We have over 500 vehicles globally that use our fuel cell technology, and we're looking to increase that significantly, at least here in the US.
Okay. How about you, Gary? Your thoughts?
I actually agree with Sayanta. Like, it's kind of weird to say that because I'm a hydrogen fuel cell startup developing new materials. So sometimes people are like, wait, if you think the technology is ready, why are you trying to improve it more? And the way I think about it is like, I think the technology is definitely enough for local implementation and smaller scale implementations. But if you can use technology to dramatically improve performance and drop down the cost curve, then you can allow widespread adoption. And that's what we're trying to do, right? So like the other way I think about it is like, today, if you want to go out and buy a fuel cell, right? Can you do it? Yes, you can. In fact, you can go out and buy a fuel cell and buy hydrogen and you will get electricity out of this thing. Now, can you do it without blowing out your bank account? No. So it's a cost argument for now, right? Now, how do you go down the cost curve? Well, option A, economics of scaling. So, just massively increase your hydrogen production options, or massively increase your manufacturing of more fuel cells and so forth. Or option B, technology. So, using Selenite materials and so forth, if I 5x your durability, well, your total cost of ownership just dropped down by about 5, right? Or increase your efficiency by 20% raw, same thing, almost double. I can do 1.5x on your costs, reduction costs. So things like that, right? But as a whole, can we do hydrogen today? Yes. Question now is, can we scale hydrogen to the level that we want it to be at? Is the thing I think about most of the time.
Okay, thank you. Gary, I'm going to stay with you because you're kind of unique. You're kind of part of a new generation of entrepreneurs, fresh out of college. I really admire you. I wish that I could have done that. I wish it was a mentality when I came out of college. What do you see the role for, entrepreneurs, young startup companies like yourself, in the hydrogen economy?
Bring energy. I know it's so cliche because hydrogen is used for energy too now, but I mean it, right? I think there is, I hate to say it, but there is a tremendous amount of skepticism around hydrogen, right? Because history lesson back in the 2000s and so forth, right? Hydrogen had a start, right? And then it didn't quite happen, and then now this hydrogen is coming along again, and people are like, well, what makes it different now than before? Why will we succeed now and before? And I think of it as, part of the role of, someone like me coming into the field is, you come in with fresh eyes and you can almost kind of disconnect and be like, no, we will try this again. And kind of take a step back from all the skepticism. And instead of using it as skepticism, use it as lessons learned. Right. So that's one of the most important things. Now, on a more concrete standpoint for like innovation, right? The problem we are trying to solve is actually a problem that DOE has been trying to solve for like 50 years. And we think we've cracked at least about half of the problem now, right? With Ted's help, because I worked with Ted, you are part of my team. I work with you in Argonne. So I wouldn't go that far as like, I can be you. Well, we talk regularly. On that note, right? It's to acknowledge that, science has progressed significantly, right, in the last 50 years. So a problem that we couldn't solve way back when to unlock the potential of hydrogen, we can solve today, right? So it's a confluence of time, ideas, and a new generation that you can basically finally enable this technology to happen. And then after that, you just kind of have to be young and have the wife and kids, and then take the plunge, really.
Okay, thanks, Gary. One of the questions popped up here, and it builds into another question. You know, Susan, you're on the production side. Sianta, you're basically on the off-taker side, but there's sort of, you know, when you start getting to hydrogen at scale, you know, how do you move all of this hydrogen around? You know, I think Gary made the comment, you know, looking at the NREL resource maps, you know, we're a lot of wind out here, a lot of water, but yet, you know, somebody commented there are actually areas of Illinois where water is a concern. You know, you can talk today, hydrogen's basically made at the point of consumption. But, you know, if you look at the oil and gas industry, you know, you have a wide distribution network. So, I mean, how do we get to the point where, you know, we have the wide distribution? What are going to be the challenges? You know, Susan, you talked about that transition where you can no longer cost effectively move it by truck as it is today. So, Susan, do you want to take the first response?
So it's a tough one when we're talking about moving hydrogen around and say a nationwide hydrogen network. I don't think the network's going to be built all at once. I think that's the angst a lot of people feel. I agree it's very hard to visualize a nationwide hydrogen infrastructure right now. And I think that's why we're starting with hydrogen hubs. And that are areas where supply and demand can be shown stable enough to create a foundation. And I think these hubs will start to serve as will start to function as like nodes that once built we can begin to start planning for how they connect with one another for hydrogen transport. I think if we think a little bit smaller and more compact and then radiate out, we might be in a better situation to think nationwide. I guess I'll turn it over to the other panelists for their thoughts on it as well. Okay,
how about Sianta? Do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I totally agree. As in, you know, I kind of look at where we are from a timeline perspective, and I start calling the decade we're in as a roaring 20s, right? You know, harking back to the 1920s, where really from an energy perspective, that's when, you know, cars were coming out of production lines, the energy infrastructure would start being set up with, you know, oil and gas production out. And we've heard the term oil and gas, at least not only in this panel, but in other panels and as well as in other discussions a lot, because hydrogen has a lot of similarities with natural gas, at least in terms of infrastructure and transportation. So hydrogen hubs is a key part of the strategy. And you know, while we live in a world of instant gratification that we wish that hydrogen pipelines were there tomorrow, it would need to be built either on a mile-by-mile basis, as has oil and gas pipelines been done over the last 100 years, or repurpose existing pipelines to accommodate hydrogen. Like, you know, we all get natural gas in our homes to power our washer, dryer, or oven, or you know, other parts of the energy system that our home needs. You know, not to say that tomorrow you can just flip a switch and have hydrogen powered it, but there is a pathway in order to get it done. And hydrogen hubs is the first major step and a key part to getting there.
Gary, your thoughts?
I'm going to piggyback off of Santa's comments, actually. Like, I think that, you know, kind of how the question really comes down to, you know, how you're going to step up this infrastructure, right? Because you're not going to flip the switch and overnight be like, I have pipelines for hydrogen everywhere, anywhere, right? In fact, that would never be economically feasible for any technology. And the question is, you know, how do you have that roadmap so that you can get hydrogen where you want it, right? And like Heisen, for instance, you know, focusing on heavy duty and so forth, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because with heavy duty applications and so forth, there are clear logistical centers where you have a higher usage of hydrogen. You know, ports would be a classic example. And because of that, once you narrow down your focus to say, okay, ports and logistical centers, then suddenly it's almost like you can Google this and you'll see a map for ports and logistical centers in the US, and they're all connected by very clear kind of, okay, so I need to get hydrogen from this point to that point and this point to this point, because you can have all the usage numbers and so forth. And then you can build out your map from there. And once you have this logistical center set up, then you have a chance of creating an almost hub and spoke model from there, right? And that's why it's like, I'm quite excited about that strategy.
Okay, thanks, Gary. So, we've talked a little bit about the hydrogen hubs and how they're basically the seed towards moving towards a hydrogen economy. But, if you look at fuel cells and hydrogen today, you see the cars in California, a lot of that's driven by incentives. What does the federal government, the state, the local governments need to do to help accelerate it? As Gary pointed out, I can buy a fuel cell today. I can buy, electricity. I can buy hydrogen, and it's going to be pretty expensive because we haven't gotten to economy of scales. And, you're competing a lot against existing markets of the oil and gas. So, what for the hubs to succeed, what do they need from the federal government, state governments? Susan, let's start with you.
All right. Well, we could give a detailed answer to this question, but I think it'd take longer than what we have today. This is a complex issue, the codes and standards issue. We've actually started building a database, just to give you an example, and it includes federal, state, local codes and standards across the hydrogen value chain, which includes production, storage, delivery, and in-use, and for both North America as well as international standards that companies either mirror or replicate in some way, or companies that have businesses across multiple countries, and so they use international standards. And so far, we have found 293 applicable North American codes and standards that apply to hydrogen, and 321 international standards that we either mirror or replicate, or companies adopt because they're going over multiple countries. And new ones get added to this database each week. And so we aren't the only ones that are developing or trying to develop this landscape of codes and standards that are needed. And so I think in the coming months, maybe even in the coming weeks, we're going to start seeing handbooks and guidance documents and even tools that are going to help companies navigate the various codes and standards. I don't think the issue right now with them is that we don't have any regulations. The issue is that our regulations are all over the place for hydrogen, and we really need to kind of pull them together in a holistic way so that someone starting a hydrogen operation can know at least where to go to see what these different standards are.
Okay, thank you. Sianta, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a great, way to leverage existing work that has already been done. But as Susan mentioned, disparages, let's bring it back. I think from an economic perspective, if I were to hit it, from where, policymakers can help is, again, linking to what Susan and Gary said over here is really, we need the support from policymakers as well as the communities to help us bridge the gap till we get to economies of scale. So for instance, right now, like Gary said, buying a fuel cell and getting your own hydrogen is super, super expensive. But as we stand up production and do it at scale, and for instance, at Heisen, we're going to start manufacturing 3,000 fuel cells in our Bolingbrook facilities here near Chicago by the end of this year. That's going to enable us to significantly reduce the unit costs of fuel cells that's going to go into our trucks, which is ultimately going to reduce the sticker price to our consumers. And getting support from policymakers to get to that point would be tremendously beneficial ultimately to the consumers, where they're focused on the total cost of operations in order to be at or better than diesel for mobility. And today in the US, there's only one other state, which is on the other side of the coast, where we are better than diesel on a total cost of ownership basis. And obviously in Europe, where there is a wider and more deeper subsidy regime, and I think if not replicating exactly what we have in other areas, but taking what has worked well in those jurisdictions and seeing what we can use for our communities that may work best from an economic perspective, environmental as well as social perspective. I think there is a really, really strong reason to work towards that from my perspective.
Okay, Gary.
I'm going to be very specific on this one. So basically, first one's first, policy requirements. So all startups basically in the US, when you do deep tech research and commercialization, rely on what's called SBIR funding from the federal government. One thing states can do is to match that funding or provide a percentage match of that funding. Many states actually do that. Illinois actually passed a law to do that, but it hasn't been funded yet. So that would really help because for small startups like myself, right? You get say $1 million in federal funding, and you're literally spending that money locally here to hire talent and build up the ecosystem. I don't think it's too much of an ask for a state to reinvest in companies in the local area to be like, here's an additional $200K that you can also again spend back here in Chicago to help develop the ecosystem. That's number one. Number two, I'll take this question from a more technology commercialization standpoint that's specific to hydrogen. I think there's one opportunity here to really enable a hydrogen hub is to create a pipeline for technology commercialization for hydrogen innovations. So for instance, there's a lot coming out of Northwestern, a lot coming out from Chicago and Argonne and so forth. Actually, in fact, the whole country. The problem is once you leave the bench of like a research institution and you say, I'm going to go out and do hydrogen research for commercialization now, applied research, you start to realize, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to put a bench in my garage to do this. It will actually be quite dangerous. I'll give you Selenite's example. In order for us to do hydrogen research, we basically have to raise private funds and so forth and build a lab, which then makes entry for commercialization of new technologies rather difficult, right? So one thing state and local policy can really help is actually to pass new laws and allocate funding to actually build up technology commercialization centers, right? Think of incubators, right? But with deep tech infrastructure built in, right? For chemistry, for hydrogen and so forth, that then young innovators and entrepreneurs can basically utilize to commercialize technology. Because you don't want the case where, I have a very promising technology coming out of the lab. Okay, I need my proof of concept. Well, go raise $1 million and get hard costs in the door first before you can even try this. It's like, well, if I can get that $1 million, there's a chicken and egg problem now in commercialization. Now, programs like CRI, for instance, which I was a part of in Argonne, really helped with that, right? It's actually one of the reasons why we're alive as a company today, right? Argonne opened their doors and it was like, here, come use our labs to actually, prove the concept out so that you don't have to sink $1 million to build the fuel cell lab. They literally were like, here's a fuel cell lab, go do your stuff and show me that it works. And that's why I think it's super important.
Okay, thank you very much. We got two questions from the audience. Why don't we take the first one, then the second one I'm going to combine with some other topic that previous audience questions asked. The question is, since the hydrogen tech industry combo of old and emerging, do you see an opportunity to loop social mobility into efforts so that the hydrogen economy jobs aren't solely filled by related industry professionals and further enable acceleration of the hydrogen economy? So, Gary, why don't I start with you?
So this one, the short answer is yes. But I'll get a little bit more specific, right? I think when we say, social mobility into efforts so that H2 economy jobs aren't solely filled by related industry professionals, the acceleration I can see, one thing that's really important for the energy industry right now is the digitization of data and basically making sure that you fully understand where the supply and the demand and so forth for hydrogen. So the incorporation of like all the AI and machine learning things that we've learned in every other industry into this as part of implementation would be quite useful. I have a couple of friends actually working on this for hydrogen. But more importantly, I think when we think of like social mobility, I think of it more like from a location standpoint, right? I think of it as like, ultimately you would like, say, wealth to be kind of not just centered at cities, that kind of paradigm. And the answer is, how can you create situations where you have job opportunities across the state, right? Which comes down to, hydrogen's production centers, right? Where can you localize hydrogen so that you can create these little local communities where you have production capacity, you have talent, and you have like an economy built around, because that's the area where hydrogen is now produced. And then you kind of, again, use that as a hub for like economic development in like not just like the center of Chicago. And with that, I'm going to pass this baton on to like Susan, because she can tell you a lot more about that than I can.
Okay, Susan.
Well, I think I like the Department of Energy's model for inclusion. They have it's basically a 3-pillar process that you integrate into a hub concept or a project. And the first is community engagement. So you don't want it as an add-on. I mean, I think you need to integrate these things through every step of your planning. So how do you engage with the community? How do you make sure that the industrial densities that are coming to the area, so you're going to put in, maybe you're putting in a power plant, maybe you're putting in a set of electrolyzers or something like that. You need to make sure the community is engaged and they understand what's going on, and you're not exacerbating any kind of environmental impacts. If they're a water sparse area, should you put a bunch of electrolyzers in there that are going to require a lot of water? So those are the things where community engagement comes in. Then there's economic development and workforce development. And I think that comes in with training. So you could have occupational training for the local communities or communities in proximity, which could be vocational type jobs that people could get relatively quickly with maybe just a 2-year training program. Your community colleges and workforce development programs could come in there. But then I think you also need the major universities engaged to develop more robust programs in engineering that would lead to ultimate higher economic development, higher paying jobs for those more complex engineering positions or scientific positions that would be needed to run some of these hydrogen value chain operations. And then I think finally, the third pillar that DOE talked about was metrics. So you need to be able to quantify your success. How many jobs have you created? How many people were trained? How did you lift up a disadvantaged community? How did you incorporate a diverse set of candidates in your operations? And so those are the kinds of things that I think need to be focused on and need to be considered an important factor whenever we're coming in and developing these large systems in these regions.
Okay, with that, I'm getting a little announcement from our host. So I'd like to thank you all for your comments. I mean, I think this was a great discussion. I think it was very informative. And, again, thank you all. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Nick Urban, Director of Southern Company R&D, who will give the closing remarks. Nick?
Thanks, Ted. I'll take it from here. Boy, this was a great conversation, and what a cool hour of discussion around hydrogen and its potential for the future. At Southern Company, I have the honor of serving in our R&D department and supporting the innovative and very forward-thinking efforts at Nicor Gas, as well as all of our other subsidiaries around the country. We have run an R&D program for a very long time, since the early 1970s. And in doing so, we really focus on bridging the gap between what I like to say is sort of what is possible which means we've done the physics and the chemistry, and we believe that it's possible, to what's practical, right? Which is sort of putting those things in motion in the field and actually meeting the communities and customers that we need to serve with those technology solutions. We've done that across a broad spectrum of technologies, including everything from batteries, electric vehicles, renewable energy, nuclear, all the way to today we operate on behalf of the Department of Energy, our National Carbon Capture Center, which is really focused on developing the state-of-the-art in CO2 capture and sequestration. In that role, what I do at Southern, one of the primary responsibilities is to think about hydrogen and the hydrogen technology that can serve us going forward. When I think about hydrogen, I think about it in a couple of contexts. The big idea of hydrogen to me is that it provides an energy vector to serve our customers in very new and different ways than we have traditionally. And in doing so, creates enormous opportunities for value creation in our business. At the end of the day, what we want to do is create a real focus on those customers. And so while as a technologist, I believe in all these things that we've talked about for the last hour, I'm reminded daily and try to keep focus on that end customer perspective. And so, again, going forward, our aim is to create that high customer value while we meet our net zero goals and help them meet their net zero goals. So I think one thing I'll leave us here and maybe as a perspective and bringing it back to that customer is we believe in technology. We believe in the role it can play. We also believe that the provision of energy and its use by our customers are foundational to preserving quality of life. So as that last question was talking about communities and how we lift, how we raise all boats in this energy transition, I think that's something to keep very front of mind. And I think uniquely, perhaps, hydrogen provides us a great opportunity to do that through the integration of all these disparate industries, through the stacking of value across common infrastructure, and ultimately has this potential to give us an outcome on the other side of this energy transition that is really transformational for the quality of life of every person that we serve. So really want to thank everyone here for participating. Thank World Business Chicago and BP for their partnership with NICOR in supporting this, and really look forward to continuing to partner with all the panelists and all the rest of you out there as we seek these technology solutions. With that, I'll hand it back and wish you all a good day.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you to Nick. Thank you to our panelists, our fantastic moderator, Ted, and of course to you, our audience, for joining us today. We have learned so much over the course of these sessions and hope that you have too. If you would like to catch up on any of the sessions that you may have missed, you can find the recordings on World Business Chicago's YouTube channel. WBC, NICOR, and BP believe in the future of clean energy, and we thank you for your support of this series. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.